Good morning, everybody. So good to see each of you here in the house of the Lord. Let me ask you to please remain standing out of reverence to the Word of God. And let's read together the theme verse we've been reading this year together. You are good, and you do good. Teach me your statutes. Psalm 119, 68. Thank you so much. You may be seated. We're continuing in our series of messages, The Great Rescue, the Bible and being found by God. We've covered a good portion of the Bible and have finished with the historical books in the Old Testament. We're now in the section of the Bible we call Poetry and Wisdom. It's those 5 books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. And we have in these books both poetry, represented in the book of Psalms and in the book of Song of Songs, which is a collection of love poems. And then we have wisdom in the books of Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Proverbs is what it sounds like. It's mostly a collection of proverbs, short sayings that kind of make a general observation about life. And please don't misunderstand when you're reading the Proverbs. They're not promises. They're not guarantees. The whole point of a proverb is to make a general observation that will help guide you in general decision making and generally holds true, but it's not 100% of the time. We use Proverbs. A stitch in time saves 9. By that we mean that if when a garment needs repair and all it takes is 1 stitch to take care of the problem, if you do it then, you will save a lot of time because if you ignore it and let it get worse, it'll take a lot more stitching to fix it. And by extension, you would apply that principle to other things in life. If there's a problem, if I address it quickly, it will be a lot less trouble than if I ignore it and let it become a bigger problem. But we understand these aren't universally, always, every circumstance it's going to happen exactly that way. They're just general principles to kind of evaluate things in life. So Proverbs is mostly that kind of wisdom. And then Job and Ecclesiastes are sometimes referred to as cynical wisdom because they come at wisdom from the opposite side, not from the side of giving advice, but from the side of asking questions. And the book of Job deals with the question of how do we deal with suffering when we can't make any sense of it? What happens when the righteous suffer? And the book of Ecclesiastes raises the ultimate questions of meaning in life. Is there any purpose to life? And why does it seem like no matter what we do, it all ends up the same in the final accounting of things? Is everything vain? So they kind of counterbalance each other, the books of cynical wisdom and then the book of Proverbs. I am just kind of giving us a flavor of some of these things. So I did last week a little bit of poetry. We looked at Psalm 23. This week we'll look a little bit at wisdom. And we're going to look at a section from Proverbs. I'm not going to get into the cynical side of wisdom, but just know that it's there. And just by way of introduction, you know what I'm probably most proud of in my personal life? I'm deeply satisfied that after many years, I was able to finally complete my PhD studies. And what might surprise you about this, it's been a while, you've known about it, but what might surprise you about this is that it was never really something I wanted to do. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist. And that was my plan for life until God called me to preach. And I very reluctantly surrendered to preach. And then I said, okay, I want to preach, I want to teach, but I don't want to pastor. And God said, well, actually, yeah, I need you to pastor. So I started pastoring. And in order to do that better, I tried to get training. I went and got a Master of Divinity. And that was really my interest, was to be trained to be a pastor. And then God burdened me with this. How do I help others who need to train to lead? And if you want to train people or help people in that, you need to get a PhD. So that's how I ended up getting a PhD. But I never really wanted it. It was never really the path I would have chosen in life. And that's what I've discovered in life. That what God had for me, if I just opened myself up to it, was so much better than what I was going to take for myself. And that's what we're going to be looking at in today's passage. I've titled the passage, Wisdom and Folly. We are in Proverbs chapter 9, and let's dive right in. Verse 1, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. This is the first thing we're told about wisdom, and she's being personified in these verses as though she's a person. She is a builder. Wisdom is about building something. It's about taking the chaos and the emptiness of life and building something significant and useful out of it. Wisdom is about supplying meaning and structure and purpose to life. And wisdom builds her house. And in Hebrew thought, wisdom pre-exists anything else in creation because wisdom is what God employed to create the universe. And by wisdom, God established the parameters of how the whole universe fits together in perfect balance and how everything is arranged exactly so. And perhaps here we have a description of that, a very quick poetic idea that wisdom is the reason the universe itself exists. And we can think of the whole universe, creation itself, as her house. In the ancient world, their thought was that we had these chaotic deep waters and that the earth was sustained above the chaos of the deep waters by pillars that were underneath. And perhaps this is a description of that, of how wisdom is the way God established the world we live in and the foundation upon which it was laid. But wisdom builds a home. Wisdom is about constructing and making something useful. What does wisdom do? Verse 2, she has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. She has also arranged her table. She has sent out her female servants. She cries out from the highest points of the city, whoever is simple, turn aside here. To the one who lacks heart, she says. Let me pause there. So the next thing we have about wisdom, she's built all of this, and then she lays out a feast. Now, in the ancient world, it was very different than in the developed modern world, where food is super abundant. In antiquity, food was scarce, and you did not slaughter meat every day. You did that when there was something important, some special celebration. And that's the idea of wisdom laying out a wonderful feast to invite people to. And she prepares, she mixes her wine so that there's the drink of celebration. And she arranges her table and makes sure everything is perfectly laid out for this wonderful feast she's going to throw. And then she sends out her female servants. So wisdom makes use of servants who convey her message. Wisdom makes use of other people. And sometimes you'll hear the voice of wisdom directly. God will whisper in your ear. Sometimes you'll hear it through somebody next to you who speaks to you something godly. But both through servants and by her own voice, wisdom, which we can think of as the voice of God himself calling out to us. God, who alone is wise, cries out from the highest points of the city. Now, in antiquity, you would reserve the highest point of the city for the temples. And that's where the gods lived, and the highest point of the city, overlooking the rest of the city. A great example of this I saw when last year we were in Athens, and we saw the Acropolis. I took a photo I want to share with you. I took this photo in Athens. That's the Acropolis. So the highest point in the city, that's where all the temples to the gods were, and they overlook the whole city. That's the picture being painted here of wisdom and her location. Wisdom abides where God abides. She sits where God sits. Even Solomon, when he built the temple in Jerusalem, put it in the highest position in the city. That's where God lives. That's where wisdom's house sits. And she cries out from the highest point of the city. This is what you need to understand about wisdom, both through agency of servants of God and through God's voice itself, speaking directly to every human heart. The cry of wisdom is ringing out across the world. And you cannot tell me I'm a fool and I live the life of a fool because I never knew any better. You are lying. God cries out to you. God calls you, and God puts in your path people who call to you and say, turn to God. And if you stubbornly go your way, it's not because you were not able to hear the voice of wisdom. It's because you chose to ignore the voice of wisdom. Because it cries out from the highest point in the city. God is constantly calling us to wisdom. Who is invited? Is it a select special few? No. Whoever out there is simple. In other words, you don't have to be super smart. You don't have to be the person most together. Anybody. You don't have to be far along the path. You can be the simplest of simpletons. You are invited. The one who lacks heart. Most translations supply there a different word. And that's because in the Hebrew thinking, heart was not so much the center of emotion as it was the center of the understanding of the mind, of the drive in life. It's where you muster courage, and it's where you evaluate choices that you make and employ your human will to determine the things you're going to do or not do in life. And that's she says, to the person who is depleted in heart. Sometimes wisdom requires that we have the strength to stand and do the right thing when it's not easy. Wisdom requires diligence and a willingness to work hard sometimes. And it requires heart. So I've chose to translate that heart because I think heart says more than just understanding. It's not just that you lack understanding. It's that you lack the will to live a wise life. Even if somebody were to explain it to you perfectly, you would still not have the strength to do it. That's who wisdom calls out to and lays out a feast for. So I've divided the invitation of wisdom in 3 sections. The first, in verses 5 and 6, I think, lay out a feast that involves a new path in life. Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed. And this is God's invitation to feast with him. God has prepared a feast for you. Come and enjoy it. Notice there's no description of payment. This is offered freely. It is an invitation. You don't have to buy your way into this. You just have to come. But there's only one way to walk into the house of wisdom. Verse 6, abandon folly and live, and go in the way of understanding. The only way to walk into wisdom is to walk out of folly. And there are many things in life that work this way. And the Bible is filled, start to finish, with true dichotomies, things where one thing is exclusive of the other. You have to choose one or the other. You cannot have both. You can live or you can die. You can be reconciled or you can be an enemy of God. You can be righteous or you can be wicked. But you cannot be both. You can be on the path of wisdom or you can be on the path of folly. You cannot walk both paths. So if you want to walk in wisdom, the first step is, I'll use a word you're probably familiar with, repentance. You look at the life you're living, at the foolishness of your ways, and you say, I renounce it. This is not how I'm going to live life. I am not going to make a wreck of everything in my life. I am going to abandon that. I am going to leave it by the wayside. I am going to turn my back on that. Without repentance, there is no way to walk into wisdom. Without abandoning folly, you cannot walk in wisdom. They are mutually exclusive. It is a new path. Now, what does this new path look like? It is a way of understanding. God is trying to help us truly understand our lives. We are often given a false dichotomy, a false presentation of two things as mutually exclusive, as opposed to each other. Have you ever heard people talk about you can either embrace faith or reason? You can either believe in God or you can understand things. You can either do God or science. That is a false dichotomy. Those two things are not truly opposite, and they are not truly mutually exclusive. And I will say faith is on both sides of that equation. It's woven into the structure of our existence because we are finite beings and because most of what goes on in the universe is completely out of our control. We cannot live any other way than by faith. And what is faith? Faith is the trust that what I do not control is going to follow the patterns I expect. The atheist who says, I do not believe in God, but I believe in science, has by faith accepted that given the same set of circumstances, the universe will operate in exactly the same way, time after time. There's no way to prove that. There's no way to guarantee that. There's no way to control that. But by faith, we accept that if I drop a ball, it's going to fall down. It always has before. I assume it will again. We don't know that, but by faith, we assume that that's the way the universe works. We can't control it ourselves, so our only other option is to exercise faith in some way. So faith in God is not some wishful thinking, some delusion. Faith in God is the choice to trust that God is who He says He is. That the God who says He loves us, and the God who says He is wise, and the God who says He will redeem us and rescue us if we will surrender our hearts and lives to Him, that He is truthful and worthy of our trust. So we choose to trust in Him. What happens when we do that? We repent, we abandon folly, and we walk with God. He takes us in a way of understanding. So faith is not about not understanding anything. Faith is not about not exercising reason. Faith is not about shutting your mind off. Just the opposite. God is going to help you truly think rightly about the world and understand with accuracy what's around you. Verses 7 through 9 lay out that there are these two paths in life. And it does so by using three proverbs. And these are the traditional structure of proverbs. And proverbs generally follow two structures. They are either synthetic or antithetic. And synthetic is when the first line of the proverb is basically repeated in the second line. Perhaps amplified, some other nuance, but you're basically repeating the same idea twice. That's synthetic. Antithetic is when the first line says one thing and the second line says something opposite to that. So those are kind of the two structures. Now it's very interesting. These three proverbs arranged here in verses 7, 8, and 9. The first proverb is arranged in a synthetic way. The second one is arranged in an antithetic, and the third one is arranged in synthetic. So we have two phrases that are the same, and the first line in the second one, it goes with the top two. So you have three things about the fool, and then you switch gears, and the second half of the second one goes to the wise person, and then the last two are about the wise. So you have three things about the fool and three things about the wise person. So let's look at them. Whoever corrects a scoffer takes shame for himself, and whoever rebukes a wicked person will harm himself. You see, you basically are kind of repeating the same idea in the second line, right? Correcting, rebuking. And you're talking about a scoffer, a wicked person, the person who his response to wisdom is to scoff at it, to make fun of it, to act like I'm too superior to listen to anything you have to say to me. The scoffer is not interested in advice. The scoffer is not interested, certainly not interested in correction. They want to stay doing what they're doing, and they don't want anybody to butt into their life and tell them anything. And what happens when you try to offer correction to somebody like this? They're going to heap shame on you. They will likely insult you. They will treat you disrespectfully. They will be cruel to you. What's going to happen when you rebuke a person who is committed to wickedness? They're going to harm you. They're going to wound you. They're going to lash out and try to hurt you. That's the way the fool lives, because they are so greedily defensive of their folly, of their foolishness, that they will lash out blindly at anybody who tries to intervene. The next proverb switches halfway. It's antithetical. Do not reprove a scoffer lest he hate you. That's one more thing. When you try to correct or reprove somebody like this, their response is hatred. Hatred. But thank God we can switch gears. Let's talk about a different kind of person. Reprove a wise person, and he will love you. The wise person is the exact opposite. They don't resent correction. They welcome it. And when you correct them, they have the wisdom to know that what you are trying to do is help them, their life be better. You're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to help them. And they rightly recognize these attempts as attempts to help. And their response to that is not shame, it's not hurt, it's not hatred. It is to love in return. Thank you. You loved me enough to correct me. I love you for that. Wise people love people who correct them when they're wrong. Give to a wise person, and he will be wiser still. Notice how broad that is, give. It doesn't say what we're giving. A lot of translators try to supply, give instruction or give teaching, but I think it's deliberately vague in that a wise person is wide open to whatever it is you want to share with me. You have something to give, I welcome it. How many times are we defensive when people are trying to share something with us? Like it's an attack. So often our response, our immediate gut response, is to take offense when somebody's trying to share something with us. A wise person is so open that whenever somebody has something to give, they receive it. And you know the end result is they become wiser still. Teach a righteous person, and he will increase in learning. You see, here's the way of living of the wise. We are wide open to receive anything God wants to bring into our lives and anybody he wants to use to do it. We're not defensive. We're not territorial. We're not constantly taking offense. We welcome anybody who speaks into our life with the intent of encouraging or correcting or helping us do better and walk in a better path. And the result of living this way is that we are constantly becoming wiser. And when I make a mistake and I'm corrected, the next time I face that, I am likely to not make the same mistake if I am wise and received the correction. I will be better off next time. And I will continually be growing in learning. I will know more and more about what is true and good and wise. Consider the contrasts in these two paths in life. The fool is defensive and hateful. You cannot speak into their life because they are closed shut. And what happens? What chance is there for a correction in course in the life of a fool? None at all. They have shut themselves off from it. And they are locked into their folly, and all they're going to do is repeat the same stupid mistakes time and time and time again. And anytime somebody says, you already tried that and it already went awful, why don't you change course? They say, get away, butt out, leave me alone. And they're hateful and rude and cruel because they're locked into, I want to destroy my life. And the fool is never going to get out of that pit. because they have shut themselves off from anybody that loves them. And the only people they will let in are those who affirm them in their foolishness. The wise person, on the other hand, is constantly receiving. And they may not know everything right now, and they may be making mistakes, and they may be stumbling along, but they are learning. And they're better off today than they were yesterday. And they're going to be better off tomorrow than they are today. And it is a constant ascent into the full feast that God has prepared at the table of wisdom. That is the path of wisdom. It's not being trapped in a pit. It's a climb from shame to glory, from death to life. The final section here tells us where we get started. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yahweh, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Where does wisdom start? It starts with the fear of Yahweh. Now, the fear of Yahweh, we often think of this as profound reverence, but it's more than that. It's not just reverence that we have toward Yahweh. It is fear. Why fear? It's not that we fear God because He is good. We fear God because we're bad. It is my evil heart that causes me to fear God, because I look at the holy, righteous Creator of the universe, the loving, pure, holy, righteous One, and I know it is His responsibility to call everything He's created to an account for what we have done with what He laid in our hands. And as I look at my responsibility before my holy Creator, I recognize immediately that I have screwed the pooch. I have messed up. I have offended and disobeyed and sullied the good things He has put in my hands. And He has every right to reject and condemn me. So when I come before Him and I say I fear Yahweh, it is a very deep-rooted fear. Eternal death is what hangs in the balance here. And I rightly deserve it. That recognition of guilt before your Creator, that is where wisdom begins. Because until we recognize that, there's no renouncing folly. There's no abandoning the path of foolishness. But when we come to that point of fear of Yahweh, we are ready to take that first step. I want to leave this behind. And I want to entrust myself to the fearsome, holy God who is inviting me in. Knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. You see, wisdom is not just an abstract concept. It is woven into who God is. You want to become wise? There is no way to become wise without coming to know God. Because wisdom is wrapped up in Him, so that we grow in understanding as we grow in our knowing of the One who is holy. It is a relationship with God that opens us up to wisdom. For by me your days will be many, and to you will be added years of life. It's a general observation that wisdom tends to lead to a longer life. Wise people don't overdose, right? They don't die of liver failure because they abused alcohol to the point of destroying their lives. There are many ways in which wise living generally translates into a longer human life, but consider the invitation Christ extends to, if you put your faith in me, I will give you life eternal. I will share eternal living with you. Well, then we're talking about wisdom leading to a huge extension of life, unending. If you are wise, final warning. If you are wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you alone will bear it. One of the most painful things about being a parent is that you can surrender your life to God's wisdom all you want, but it will not transfer to your kids. My wisdom, my choice to surrender my life to the wisdom of God means that I will benefit at the feast table of God's wisdom. But I cannot make that choice for anybody else. I cannot make the decision for anybody else. So if I am wise, it's going to benefit me directly. And if I choose to scoff, to turn my nose up at it, to despise correction and wisdom, then you alone are going to bear with the burden of that choice. It's that simple. And sometimes there are benefits to being close to wise people. They tend to treat us better than fools. They tend to love us and extend themselves on our behalf, and we get many fringe benefits. But ultimately, no amount of their well-meaning and help is going to fix the problem that is ruining our lives. They are incapable of saving us from our own foolishness if we are committed to it. And if you choose to be a fool, you alone are going to die alone. That's just the truth of it. Okay, wisdom's invitation and warning is done. We turn to folly. And folly is also presented as a woman. Woman folly is loud, simple, and knows nothing. She's simple, not in the unadorned, unaffected way. No, she's simple in the sense of being stupid, and deliberately so. Simple because she will not learn, in the worst possible sense. And she won't shut up. She's loud. And you may have noticed that sometimes the greatest fools are the biggest blabbermouths out there. They just cannot shut up. They have nothing to say, but they won't shut up about it. They have opinions about everything, because all they do is spout out the poison that's in them. How's she described? Well, she's so lazy, she won't even stand to call out. She sits at the doorway of her house on a seat in the heights of the city. Now, this is weird, but folly sits in the same place that wisdom sits. She's up there in the Acropolis. Why is folly in the place that should be God's? Well, it's because we have turned from God and we have created our own gods. And we have put them in the Acropolis. We have put folly and our own versions of gods in the Acropolis, right there next to the only true God. And from the heights of the city, there's her house, and she's too lazy to get up and do anything. She just sits on a chair in the doorway of her house and just waits for people to walk by. To call to those passing by the way who are going straight on their way. And here's the way folly works. People a lot of times are headed in the right direction. They're already going straight. If you leave them alone, they'll end up where they need to get. They're heading the right way. But folly interrupts and says, "What are you doing? Why don't you turn aside from that? Let's go some other direction." I've seen it over and over in the lives of our children and youth. They start this straight path. Their parents bring them to church. They hear the gospel. They understand this path with God is the way to live life. But it's very soon in life somebody calls, "Hey, that's so boring. Come here. Let's do this instead." Divert your path. Turn away from that to something else. Come here. That's the way folly calls out. Whoever is simple, turn aside here. The invitation is to exactly the same people. To the one who lacks heart, she says. And her message is a lot shorter. And here's why. Folly's message is much shorter than wisdom's because folly has absolutely nothing to give. Folly has nothing to contribute. All folly can do is ruin and destroy. So her message is very simple. Stolen waters are sweet. You don't live a life open to the hand of God who is sharing wisdom with you. You don't expose yourself to receive what God is giving to you. No, you take what you want. And only the things you have stolen are going to taste sweet to you. You absolutely reject dependence on God and select independence, and you receive nothing from anyone. What you have, you will take for yourself, and that is the only way it will taste sweet to you. And bread taken in secret is delightful. Devote yourself to the kinds of things that you need to do in hiding, because people will not tolerate them otherwise. Skulk about in the shadows. Hide what you're doing. How many evil things do we do under the cover of night because we know that the gaze of others will be lessened at night? The attention of others will be diminished. And we can, in hiding, take for ourselves the things we want. And the promise is that approach to life, that is sweet. That is truly delightful. Oh, nothing tastes better than something stolen. It goes back to the Garden of Eden, when God placed everything he had in his hands in front of Adam and Eve and said, "Here, let's rule creation together." And the serpent said, "No, you need to steal knowledge. Don't take what God's giving you. Steal for yourself what you want." And she lost it all. But he does not know that the shades are there, that her guests are in the depths of the grave. You see, Folly does not have a house. There's not that kind of warmth with Folly. Folly's house is a mausoleum. It's a place where all you have are bones and the shades of those passed on. The lonely spirits who have seen their lives ruined by folly and are left with nothing but the emptiness of the grave. That's a powerful image. But that is exactly what folly gives us. The utter ruin of our lives. And death, nothing but death. Wisdom promises life and length of days. All folly can offer us, and she lies about it, but all she can ultimately give us is not delight, it's not sweet, it's death. And if you can't see that, you are a stubborn idiot, because God is pleading for you to turn away from that. So we have a choice to make. Don't tell me you haven't heard. You've heard. I don't buy it. Don't tell me, "Oh, I never knew any better." Shut up. You're lying. God has been calling to you since the day you were born. And if you have refused to surrender, it's on you. It's not on anybody else. But we have to make a choice. Will I surrender to the wisdom God is calling me into? This means living an open life where we abandon the folly of our own path and surrender to whatever God's going to bring to us, and we welcome it. And we learn, and we change, and we grow, and we never stop receiving. Or we can turn aside to wisdom's mausoleum and say, "I don't want what God wants to give me. I have no interest in the feast he's set before me. I want to steal for myself what I want out of life. And I will take it, and I will relish it, and I will delight in it until I die." And you will, forever. That's the path of folly. I hope and pray this morning that you will reject the siren's call of folly, and you will instead embrace wisdom. Utter dependence on God, surrendering to him. We're going to sing a song now, and this is our time to respond to the word God has been speaking to us. I want to challenge you to come before God and kneel down before him and say, "God, I abandon my own way. And I want to be open. I want to feast at your table of wisdom. Guide me, teach me, take my life, open my heart up, and teach me to be a wise person." If that's you this morning, come while we sing. I'll be over here to the side. If anybody needs somebody to pray with them, my wife and I will be here to the side. But you can also come just to the altar and kneel and pray if you want to do that. Come while we sing. Let's all stand.